that, you used to have to pay, and it was a real problem. So if we move on to the fourth submarine, could open standards democratize AI? So give yourself a quick intro and give us 2 minutes.
Okay, hey everyone, my name is Sayam Pathak and I'm working with the vCluster as Head of Developer Relations, and I am also the founder of Cube Simplify. So very interesting topic, could open standards democratize AI? Like everyone have already said over here, there are a few points that we discussed. So anyone should be able to be the builder because when you have the closed source model, how do you build on top of that? You know, we don't want smaller, only the few big giants controlling everything that is out there. So we saw when DeepSeek came and some of the open source models started coming up, Hugging Face started coming up, how everyone, you know, created their own set of rack pipelines and built their own mini AI data center factories. Then also coming to, you know, want to give you the same highlight from the container ecosystem where I kind of belong. So there was this Docker that came up, and Docker kind of revolutionized how to run in the containers. Then came the Open Container Initiative, an open standard for how you build containers. That's how it is important. So you had Linux, and then it was again open standard, open source, and then all that on top of that you had SUSE built their own flavors, Red Hat built their own flavors. So we have to enable, like, the open source ecosystem and the open standards enable everyone to build something that is meaningful. Another example is like Rohit recently built SkillKit. So it's important because right now when you create a skill and you build it for one particular agent and you want to switch the agent, you have to rewrite your skill. Why do you need to do that? There has to be open standard and open way in order to do that, so that you don't waste your time, your money is saved, and you are, you know, doing that. Another thing is observability. Like we had Datadog, New Relic, and then came OpenTelemetry. As soon as OpenTelemetry came in as an open standard, the whole observability ecosystem is now stabilizing. So that's the power of open source and open standards that they bring in. Even the bigger players are then forced, or they contribute. So Docker itself contributed to the Open Container Initiative, which is what we need. So Anthropic building MCP is a very good step that the bigger players want others to join forces and build those open standards. So it doesn't have to be built in silos, it has to be built together. So where the big organizations, smaller organizations have to come together, building an adoption. So adoption was a key thing. So building and adopting these open standards so that we can democratize the AI. So I think it plays a very big role over there. Thank you.
And when we talk about yes, thank you. When we talk about democratizing AI, we often talk about the end user and giving people the access as users of AI. But there's another piece to it, and that other piece is about you all building your own projects and building your own businesses on the back of it. And what we're talking about here is the way that Docker in particular became a standard around the cloud native ecosystem, and it enabled people to build businesses. Kubernetes is similar. You start to see businesses around this, you start to see engagement and interoperability. And what those standards allow us to have is interoperability. And then when you innovate and you build businesses around those open or de facto standards, what's happening is that you're able to collaborate, you're able to build things that people will adopt quickly. And it really is part of the power of open source that you have that access to a standard, to a de facto standard that enables this interoperability and for people to come in and use what you have built. We are launching on Thursday evening a video. It's only a short video. We'll be launching it on the evening, and you'll see it on our website. And it has one of the MCP founders talking about the value of that standard and why Anthropic has put it into a foundation in the same way as we saw the Cloud Native Foundation build out around the Cloud Native ecosystem. We're starting to see the strength in that open source ecosystem. There's a talk this afternoon with the OECD, and I think Roost are also here. And they've built tools that you can use when you're building your AI that will support you building your AI that are all open source. So just as some pointers. Okay, so let's move on to the biggest concern people generally have about AI, security. So does identity secure agentic AI? And maybe you can explain a little bit about identity if that's not an unfair question as you start. So please introduce yourself. And
Hi everyone, I'm Shivai. So That's the question in case anyone missed it. So I come from an AI and a machine learning background as well, and I've been a code contributor to a bunch of different open source projects within the CNCF landscape as well. And I got to work a lot closely with the Docker team when they were launching the Docker MCP gateway or the catalog. And that was essentially one of the ways in which they were trying to address this particular concern. So when we talk about identity, it basically goes two ways, right? One is identity for what type of MCP tool call I should make. So, Rohit spoke about authorization. So MCP officially supporting the OAuth 2.1, which basically means that you can go very deep into the fine-grained authorization in terms of which particular MCP tool call can be made by a specific user, but how you can actually also discover, because in an enterprise situation, you probably don't want to showcase certain MCP tools that can be made or can be discovered by certain type of users. So that's more around the authorization and the fine-grained scopes that you can make when it comes to making these tool calls, or even with the typical agent behavior. But the other part of the identity is also that can the agent actually understand the intent behind the user, right? For example, one of the wonderful discussions that we were having was that how does, let's say you're using Claude and you ask Claude that go to Amazon.com and make me this XYZ purchase. So does Amazon know that which particular user has actually made that call? Because it's basically the agent in between that's making the tool call to call Amazon, but do we have enough scopes and permissions, and have we given that layer of identity that can identify that Amazon as a system, backend system, can identify, yes, I'm actually giving the private information about the account for this given user. So we have to think about the policies in terms of how you define the OAuth, because what you have to do is that if you have a multi-layer agentic system, the level of scopes of permissions basically reduces as you go. So you start with the most auth, but you also have to keep in mind as you're making this entire agentic flow, you don't lose the identity of who made that original call, right? So that is why the traceability or the auditability of what tool calls are being made and how those are being made is also equally important. So how you trace that whether the MCP tool calls were made with the right intent, that also is equally important, right? So you have to, it's basically two ways. You control what MCP does and how it makes the tool calls, who is making the tool calls, but you also keep a accountability of when it made that agent call, whether it was secure enough or not. Because you have prompt injections, you have all of these security challenges that you can basically run into. And the policies that you define about how MCP tool calls will be made is not just limited to the authorizations, but it's also more about how agents also communicate with each other. So you basically merge A2A protocol with MCP, and you think about how the SPI, FFE, these type of security protocols can also be now made alongside MCP. So that's the great thing about open standards, that you can now incorporate it with different type of models, with other security principles that you typically have always had with software development, but now you can adopt them for agentic systems as well.
You had a great conversation. There's been a lot of good conversation in the room. So coming on to data. Data is the problem and the answer. You introduce yourself and give us 2 minutes. We're going to be bang on time if you stay to time.
Yeah, hi. Yes, so data is the problem and the answer that captures, I think, a central paradox in modern AI. So our mighty team, where are you? We set out and we identified a few problems, which are lack of experimental data, proprietary silos, privacy risks, bias, risk costs, and also a reluctance in some cases to share. My name's James Lovegrove. I'm public policy lead for Guess Who, Red Hat. And of course, the answer, surprise, surprise, open source, open collaboration, and perhaps a bigger room. But in more detail, I'm conscious of time. Again, my mighty team came up with some ideas. Yeah, so quantity is there, but there's a lack of quality, and that's the role for upstream projects to democratize AI model improvement. Of course, Red Hat's involved in a number of these. One such is Instruct Lab, I'd encourage you to have a good look at. But otherwise, what else is there? Sorry, I'm conscious of time. And then also data science pipelines. The need to sort of automate and clean process, and the power of sort of model serving, which is out there to, again, help India and other countries to democratize AI models. So thanks back to you, Amanda.
Thank you. Brilliant. So, as we get to our final group and our final topic, I can feel the anticipation mounting in the room. Are data centers going to solve our challenge? So let's have a quick show of hands. Who thinks data centers will solve the challenge? You have a very limited positive response there, Simon.
A very optimistic response. So I'm Simon. I'm from a company called Sivo. We had a great discussion, very interactive. So we started talking about, are they all going to be just big data centers, or actually we're going to see much smaller data centers? So quick, some facts, big data centers. Today, many of these companies are renaming themselves. Rather than from data centers, they're calling themselves AI factories, okay? We're moving from racks with power of the H200, about 25 kilowatt, to the B200, about 130 kilowatt, to the next version that comes out in September, 0.5 megawatt per rack. 2027, NVIDIA are telling us they will be 2 megawatt per rack, okay? So are these data centers going to need the size, or is it all just going to be smaller data centers with massive power? But what does that mean for India? Yeah, so in India, the data centers are today all in tier 1 cities. They go to tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities. Do you have the power infrastructure, the water capacity to deploy these large-scale deployments? And will the local residents, local population want to have their water taken away from them? The power that they need for lighting, cooking, again, not being available because you need 2 megawatts per rack. Actually, we're going to start talking a different currency. That won't be the measure anymore. The measure with the leading companies today are tokens per kilowatt, okay? So tokens per kilowatt. So we're going to see some big AI factories where the big training jobs are working, but also we're going to see edge data centers, much smaller data centers, less power, less cooling, but close to the population for inferencing. Thank you.
Thank you. So I am really proud of you all working so hard this morning to bring us this fantastic content. We will pull that content together, and we are producing a report on AI openness of as many conversations as we can pull into a report across the summit. It will be available by 5 p.m. IST on Friday. I'm probably going to be up all night the night before making sure it is. You'll see our video on Thursday night with the MCP founder. Tomorrow at 10:30, we will be next door with an amazing panel on resilience and sovereignty. Thank you all for coming. I hope to see you at some of the other sessions I'm speaking at. And ladies and gentlemen, before you rush off, just one more thanks to all of our wonderful leaders. Thank you very much. I'm glad. I just wish we had more space. Wait, can you get me as I'm moving? You want a selfie?
slides. They'll also present a physical copy to you at the end of it. So.
Somebody have control of this mic, or can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Good morning. Namaskar. My name is Parag Saxena, and I have the privilege of having two very skilled people in the world of drug discovery. Dr. Jonathan Picker, who has come down all the way from Boston, where he is at Harvard as a professor of genetics. He's also trained as a surgeon. And then we have Vibhu Agarwal, who I first met when he was at Stanford about a decade ago. And he runs a company in India that's germane to the topic that we're going to talk about. He runs a clinical trials company. So as a one-line background, what I've done this is my 5th decade of investing in venture capital companies. And so we've had the benefit of a lot of time in investing in companies and seen a lot of wonderful trends. And I'm particularly excited about biotech and tech, if you can't be in venture capital without being in tech. So we do a lot of tech. And once upon a time, we used to do retail. So that's my way of background. And this is an area, drug discovery, that we have invested in a lot of companies over a long period of time. And I'll lay out for you over the next 10 minutes, somewhere between 7 and 12, what we hope to talk about. And as you know, the title of this is the role of AI in drug discovery. And modern drug discovery, AI is really important for it. And I don't know how many of you are in either of these fields, AI or anything related to pharma. Can I have a show of hands? Okay, very good. Be kind to us when you ask questions. We are worried about people who know too much. So if we take modern drug development and break it down, I break it down into 3 high-level parts, looking at the view from the mountaintop. The 3 parts are, first, in today's world, finding a gene variant that is of interest. And Dr. Picker will say more about that as he goes along. But in simplistic terms, you collect vast amounts of data from people, right, which can be blood from which you can extract DNA or RNA, or you can do proteomics. There's a variety of things that you can do, and that gives you data. And then you have phenotypic data, how tall are they, what do they weigh, what's their BMI, therefore, what's their clinical condition when they come in, their blood pressure, perhaps their A1C, so a variety of things depending on what you're interested in. For certain kind of patients, you'll also have radiology as data, right? So the obvious rule of AI is to look through all of that and see if there's patterns that they can detect. If they can detect that there's a commonality of gene variants with people that have the same condition, right? So if you look through a large number of people and go through that, you'll be able to come to helpful conclusions, which then you can do something with. And this is important for two reasons. It's obviously important because if you are in India, perhaps you find something that might be classified as a rare disease, but when you take percentages of 1.4 billion, it's large numbers of people, right? But the other thing that's really important is if you find an interesting pathway, a way that something works, that is a globally useful proposition. And if this was a debate, and we were having a debate, I would say this House believes that India has two significant advantages over the rest of the world in doing drug discovery in AI, right? What I just talked about is one of them, which is primarily because of the vast population, but almost more importantly, the endogamous pockets of population that you have. And if you're like me, I had to look up the word endogamous when I first came across it. It's, you know, people who have a high degree of intermarriage, and you can go further than that. You have consanguineous marriage, marriage between cousins, right? And we have large pockets of both of these, and that gives rise to a much higher frequency of certain genes in those populations. So you're starting out with the advantage. It's 100 to 1,000 times, depending on the population, 100 to 1,000 times, right? And so the obvious implication of that is you now need 1/100th of the samples or 1,000th of the samples, if you're the right set of samples, to be able to find an interesting gene. May or may not work, but you at least are doing the work quickly because you're doing less and it's costing less. That's a huge advantage that we have in India. So, you know, for those who are in the business already, think about that as you get into, you know, thinking about the future. This is a place which we have a structural advantage in, and we should use it, right? There's been a lot of press about the Chinese and rare earths. This beats the hell out of rare earths, right? It's a much bigger deal, right? That's one. Two, which I'll say very little about because we don't have an expert, and it's also not a strength in India. I hope it will be over time, and there are people certainly trying it. In fact, we had a speaker that had unfortunately had to cancel, that has actually taken, you go from gene variant, now you need to get to molecule, right? So in simple terms, you got an interesting, you know, set of DNA, and now how do you make that into a pill that you take or an infusion that you have, if it's IV or an injection, right? How do you go from there to there? That's so-called translation, right? And then the third part is the use of AI on clinical trials. By the way, in the second part, there are lots of interesting things that you have. In fact, wandering around somewhere here, should grab him if you can, is Demis Habisis, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on folding of proteins, which is in that middle step, right? So there's a lot of interesting things going on in AI there. And the third is having got a molecule that you think will work, you now need to try it in humans. To actually see if it works, you have to prove it, right? Clinical trials, human clinical trials. And Vibhu will talk about that when we get to it, and the use of AI, the challenges in the use of AI, right? Some headline facts. This is a huge market, as I'm sure you know. Roughly $1.75 trillion is spent on pharmaceuticals globally, right? Important thing to know is 20% of all generics come from India, globally come from India. 40% of prescriptions in the US of generic drugs are drugs that come from US, right? So when somebody, you know, reaches for their Lipitor equivalent, I'm 71, so I take lots of these drugs. For their Lipitor equivalent, looks for their amoxicillin for their kids, you know, the probability that this was made in India is what I just cited, right, depending on where you are, but globally it's 20%. So we have a space over there, which means you have things like distribution, which means you have things like some manufacturing skills, because we also make biosimilars, right? So you're also dealing with things like antibodies, you're also dealing with biosimilars, right? Where little bugs are doing the work for you instead of having catalytic chemical reactions, right? So big market, a place we already have significant fingers in, and in both this and the third, I think we also have a huge advantage because in numbers, not in value, but in numbers, we are the software producer for the world, right? In terms of the skill set that we have, right? And if I was running any of those companies, and some of those people are here, I would exhort them. I would say, stop whatever you're doing. In fact, leave this conference now. Go and find a subset of your team that can do bioinformatics, which can be used across the whole spectrum of what I've been talking about, or further up the value chain, do more stuff, do the multimodal AI models, which are not hard to do, right? They are not hard to do. They just need focus on doing that, right? So if two of you guys actually were thinking of starting a great idea with a consumer app that delivers in 15 minutes, I would exhort you to abandon that idea and use that skill set in this, right? We've been able to do it. Look at UPI, right? We came from nowhere. We did in January more than 20 billion transactions, right? That's well more than MasterCard, a little bit less than Visa, but those guys are operating in 200 countries, right? So if you could do that, if you could get there in a few years, we should certainly be able to get to bioinformatics, to clinical trials, where we have these same edges, the vast population, right? So I probably took more time than I intended to. I'll stop there and hand it off to Jonathan, who will introduce himself briefly and go on from there.
Thanks, Parag. As Parag said, I'm a geneticist, a clinical and molecular geneticist. I've been in the field since the 1990s, and I came into it with the goal of using genetics to change medicine. It was clear that, if you really want to understand a problem and deal with it, you go to the software that is the code for everything that falls out. Now, interestingly, like many people not everybody who's here, but those who are old enough to remember when the Human Genome Project in 2003 announced the completion of the first annotated genome, there was tremendous excitement. There was a belief that medicine was going to change. Unfortunately, it's changed much less than we expect as a result of this. Sure, there's been some spectacular individual successes with particular disorders that have been transformed. But for most of us, genetics, genomics has not really changed the care that we received. And, we have to ask the question, why? We have so much information from decades of research in genetics and in medical research generally, and yet the field hasn't moved forward. The reason, really, there's a number of reasons. One of them is the sheer amount of data and the complexity of it. And this is where I think AI really is going to shine. It can do what we as humans can't, which is to take this data and assimilate it and tease out the critical elements that give direction for drug design. Now, that's the hope. There are some challenges, though. And the first is, though we have a tremendous amount of information, it's really just the tip of what's there. In fact, if we take all the information of the last multiple decades in medical research, genomic, and others, and let AI go at it as is happening, the estimates are that within 2 to 5 years, we will have extracted most of the useful information that can be translated into care. And it'll be a case of diminishing returns thereafter. So we need more data. Now, fortunately, there's an enormous amount more. In fact, estimates are that we would need to have the genomic data of at least 100 million people in order to have it powered enough to be able to produce drugs across the spectrum that would really transform medicine. Now, it's not just 100 million genomes. Genomes actually are relatively commoditized. If we have the blood, we can put them through the machines, we can obtain them, we can put the data on the cloud or wherever. The challenge is matching those genomes to the phenotype or the clinical spectrum of the individual. And by phenotype, I mean who we are, where do we come from, what is our background, what's our state of health, what's our state of disease, and how has this progressed over time? What's the natural history of who we are? Genetics plays a very major role in all of these, and they're all critical as we look towards drug development. So that's the first part, is we don't have enough data yet. We need to acquire it. Now, that's one problem. Another problem is that over 80% of the genomic and indeed medical data that we have comes from people of European and primarily North European ancestry. Now, this is a relatively homogeneous group, particularly compared to people from India. Why? Because the populations tend to merge and crossbreed with each other, leading to a gradient of difference across the different populations. Whereas in India, with the cultural and historical background of the last several thousand years, most of the subpopulations are, as Parag had said, relatively endogamous, and therefore within each of over 4,500 plus populations, we have relative islands of genetic variability. Then on top, of course, we have a relatively high rate of consanguinity in terms of looking for recessive disorders that have genes of very powerful effect and that can be very directed towards research. So we're both missing the diversity and we don't have enough data. Now, it's not feasible, at least right now, to go out and get 100 million people well phenotyped and genotyped to feed to the AI machine. So we need to think of alternatives that we can use now to move the research and the opportunity for drug development forward. There's a number of ways that can be done this. Certainly the field is cognizant of this, and biologists working in AI have developed a number of techniques, including the creation of virtual patients and virtual data banks that can be used. There's extrapolation to populations that haven't been represented in the genome, and other tools where we create virtual data to model questions on to try to find ways forward for possible pathways that we can target. That's great, except that this is virtual and it's not real data, and we need the real data because we're both missing critical variants that may not be population in the European databases. So if we don't even know they exist, we certainly can't look to see whether they're meaningful targeting. And we also have the problem again that the homogeneous populations that have been studied share a wide spectrum of variants that cloud the significant ones simply because so many are shared. You say, which of these 2,000 is the significant one when people with the disease may have all of them because of common background. So diversity is scientifically necessary. Now on top of that, and this goes a little bit beyond the remit of today's conversation, we have to think about the fact that diversity is politically and regulatorily important. Organizations such as the FDA or the EMA, the European Medicine Agency, require diverse populations now in order to allow approval for drugs that may have been designed to go forward. We don't have that. AI can create the most wonderful drugs in the world, but we're not going to be able to apply them. So we need this. Now, we can do this by including populations. India is really at a nice position as a bridge between both East and West in terms of having the diversity in one country, one regulatory apparatus, and with the scientific and administrative skills to be able to obtain this data. But, and very understandably, there's great concern about sharing this data with third parties, whether they be in other countries or external sources. We know historically that data has been abused and has not been to the advantage of the donors. So we need to think about how do we not just get the data, but how can we meaningfully use it in a way that protects the participants and the country, as well as providing an ethical framework so that it will be used for the betterment of the individuals who provide. So it's increasingly difficult to send the data out to a common center for analysis. Instead, what we can do is we can consider a federated educational approach where let's bring the AI in. We develop AI algorithms and tools to answer a particular interrogatory question about a genomic region that may be ripe for chemotherapy. We provide it locally within country or within the specific institute, and we allow them to carry out the analysis. They release none of the data of the individuals that they studied, but they provide the results and the metadata to the common central agency that may be collecting from many different regions to allow these insights to be developed. So this protects as well as allowing us to move forward. Now, I think this will be the way forward. In terms of what we'll do with the genomics, it is sequence, it is code. It doesn't necessarily mean that because gene A has a change at position Y, that it leads to a protein change that's significant. But it provides the catalyst for us to then look at transcriptional studies as well as proteomics and other omics that are functional that can then be used by the drug developers to say, okay, this pathway is disrupted here. We need a molecule that either targets right there or that targets upstream or downstream to balance it. And that provides the fuel for the drug discovery. We do need the data, though. I believe India may be in a unique position to provide the population diversity alongside other parts of the world, but primarily India could start the drive itself. And with this, I believe that we're really well positioned to change the paradigm for drug discovery and usher in the genomic era that the human genome originally proposed. So with that, I'll pass you over.
Thank you for the very insightful comments. A quick word about myself. I'm Vibhu. I have a long and checkered past. I finished undergrad way back in '97, and then my first love in life was computational linguistics. So I ended up building the first text-to-speech engine for Indian languages. And then later on, through a sequence of personal events, I came in contact with computational biology, and I realized that a lot of skills that I had picked up as an engineer and as a computational linguist start to apply immediately to biology. And then I went off to do a PhD at Stanford, and since then, I came back in '22. I run this really fun team called Mimamsa AI. One of my colleagues is here. We also have a booth in the expo hall. I encourage you to come and visit us. And initially, I had thought of focusing on the algorithmic aspect of AI as it applies to drug development, but both the speakers who went before me have spotlighted the data aspect of AI. So Parag talked about data efficiency and how finding these consanguineous populations could possibly ease the problem of doing these studies, which can be linked at linkage studies done at scale. And then Jonathan talked about the specific information content in this data and its value to finding relevant phenotypes that we can then pair against genotypes. So I was just trying to rejig my spiel in my head as they were talking, and I will admit upfront that I need to do that. I will start with the data aspect as well and then go on to the algorithmic aspect. So specifically because the area that I work in is clinical studies. So everything that happens till the time you're testing a candidate molecule on mice, on monkeys, and cell lines, and so on and so forth is known as preclinical. And then when you start to do first in human trials and look at safety first, and then efficacy at scale, and then safety, post-market, all that is clinical. And it doesn't seem like you don't see the magic of AI manifesting itself in this regime very clearly until you pause and think about it a little bit. So I think most people, or a lot of people here in this room, would be aware of the fact that 80% of clinical trials do not make their enrollment targets. And this is an average number. Averages can be very misleading, so you need to look at the variance above and below the average. So if you're looking at rare disease, something that Parag spotlighted a little while back, you will see that most of these clinical trials are not multi-arm trials. They end up being open-label, single-arm trials. Why? Because you just cannot find enough patients to enroll in those trials. Even if you were to find enough patients to enroll in those trials, as an investigator, you may not be able to convincingly argue in favor of equipoise. So it becomes unethical to find to have a control arm for these trials. So what do you do in such a situation? And this really is one of the burning problems of taking a drug which otherwise looks promising in the preclinical world to human subjects and human patients. And this is really where the availability of the right kind of data, being able to find these phenotypes, being able to quickly and efficiently enroll patients in these trials can make a big difference. How many of us have actually participated or are familiar with the clinical trial workflow? Okay. So every time you want to do a trial, it's mandatory that you will, at least in broad brush strokes, spell out what you want to do in that trial. So there's a clinical trial registry where you will say what the endpoints are, what the objective is, what the therapeutic agent is, some basic details about the study design, and also sometimes the study protocol as well. Now, from that point to finding 5, 10, 1,500, 500 or 5,000 patients that you want to enroll in that trial can be unimaginably complex. I have been trying to work in this space in India and early before I was in India, in the US as well. I'll share an example without naming the actors. So I went to a hospital that's very well known in Delhi NCR, and they are a clinical trial site for some of the global pharma companies. They're running a multiple myeloma trial. I won't say anything more because then I'll give away the name of the hospital. But I went and asked them, I said, so you're looking at a patient with a certain profile, a certain medical history, they should be treatment naive, they should have multiple myeloma with certain types of cytogenetic characteristics. How do you find these patients? And believe you me, the answer was, I'll just go and ask the floor manager. This is really, it takes if you have to think about this for a while before it sinks in, there is no way that you can accelerate drug development or try to do this for 100 therapies in one go. There's no way to scale this kind of a process. And this is really where AI can step in and be a really big game changer. So one of the things that I and my colleagues learned in the last 2.5 years of trying to work with hospitals and health insurance companies is that the data that accrues in the process of routine care, not clinical trials, also known as real world data, can be useful. So if you have think of an eligibility criteria written for let's say the multiple myeloma trial, you could give that to a study coordinator and have them sift through patient records of a hospital to find eligible patients. It's very time consuming, and I don't know, I don't have a good estimate of how long a study coordinator will do that. But this is exactly the kind of activity or a task where AI will excel at, because this is actually a search problem. Those of you who have worked with language models and understand how they work, you can think of a patient's medical record as an embedding. For those of us who are not familiar with embeddings, think of 768 floating point numbers strung together in a vector representing each and every aspect of a patient's medical record. So their diagnosis, their social history, their medical history, previous treatments, what procedures they are undergoing, what medications they are on, what they are allergic to. Everything is embedded in this 768 dimensional vector in semantic space. Now, if you were to create an equivalent vector or an equivalent representation, let me say, for the eligibility criterion of the trial that you want to run, you could just go and match the criterion to the best suited patient or a set of patients in your search space. It's as simple as that. How many of you disagree here? Well, turns out that it is a fairly complex process. One of the reasons for that is the state in which the data actually exists in these patient repositories. This is true world over, but particularly true in India, where 80%, if not more, of clinical information exists as unstructured notes, which means the information is not captured in neat tables where you have labs and prescriptions and standard codes for diagnosis and so on. It is written like a long narrative, like an essay. Patient so-and-so showed up, this is what they had, this is what we gave them, this is what their medical history was. And doctors, residents, nurses will routinely make up acronyms. So they will, they will have something like, they'll have a mention of MI, and MI could stand for myocardial infarction, it could stand for mitral insufficiency, take your pick. So when you actually start to build systems that will do this, these are the problems that you have to grapple with. Like many of us who've been in this space now for close to a decade, and we've seen the classical systems, the classical NLP pipelines, which absolutely sucked at doing any of this. And now we are in this world of these large language models and the rich, dense semantic representations. I don't think you would put us at fault for being overly optimistic that we're within striking distance of solving at least some of these problems. So I think that's a very important opportunity for AI to address. And then I had promised I'll say something about the algorithmic bit, which I alluded to it as well, because I think the super cool or the super sexy problem, which is finding the molecule or the therapeutic agent to go after the target, at one level is also a search problem. And when you can define a search in terms of a quantifiable objective, then it becomes an optimization problem. What does that really mean? I want to find something which is specific to a target. Let us say I can quantify specificity by a score on a scale of 1 to 10. So I want something which is specific 9 times out of 10. Okay? Just making this up. I also want something which is which doesn't go and stick to anything which is not a target. So off-target activity I want to minimize. And then there are all these ADMET kind of parameters. So the drug should be absorbable, it should be distributable, it should you have to worry about its metabolism, and so on and so forth. So human beings cannot do this. For machines, this is a piece of cake. So you frame this as a jointly optimizable criteria and have the right kind of data that you can go and search inside, and then this is a problem which is cut out for AI. So I think I might have been wandering a little bit all over the place. So I'll just pause here, Parag, unless you want me to go on, which I definitely can.
We can see their question.
Sure. So.
Okay, go ahead. Do we have mics to give the audience?
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Soumya Tiwari. I'm from Prayagraj, and my question is that can AI fully replace the traditional method of discovering the drug? Why or why not?
So maybe I'll start here. As a doctor, I sincerely hope AI cannot replace me. But what I think in truth is, as in other areas, I think AI is going to make a fantastic partner and do a number of things. It's going to decrease the error rate significantly. You talked about the medical records. I was sort of laughing inside because just because they're in electronic form doesn't mean the acronyms that are have different meanings aren't there, and that a misdiagnosis is not then carried through for the rest of that patient's life. It is. It's just electronic, and therefore now assumes a holier sense of value. AI will pick up on these differences. AI will help doctors to make better diagnoses. Where I think AI needs physicians is in relating the data to the reality of the person. So when we're thinking about a drug that we want to treat something, okay, obviously a cure is the best answer possible. But it may be that we're trying to mitigate the problems, decrease them. And then the question you have to ask is, what is the actual problem? What is it that impacts the person? For instance, somebody with a neurodegenerative disorder, you may say, well, they're weak, they can't walk, they drool. This is the problem. But actually, maybe what we really need to do is make sure that the drug that we design for them allows them to manage with that problem, or to also get additional benefit. Are they psychologically able to cope? What is it that the patient needs? I think a human being is needed for this, and in that sense, the human being, the human doctor is better able to see what is needed for the drug developers to turn into something meaningful for care.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Very briefly, so I think I wholeheartedly agree with Jonathan. And there are a couple of data points that you can look at. For example, if you were to go to the FDA's page of approvals for software as a medical devices, there are about 13 to 1400 of these which currently stand approved. And you will see that none of these, or maybe beyond one or two, most of these, the overwhelming majority of these, have been approved only in their role as an adjunct device, so not to replace humans. They are not going to do autonomous anything, so they are going to be used for triaging, for assisting the human, and so on and so forth. And then going back to my earlier point, I really think this is a search problem. I strongly believe that drug discovery is an information workflow, and getting to the right answer is actually a search problem. A search, for those coming from an AI background, is an optimization problem, and an optimization is only as good as the objective function that you write. You still need human beings to write the objective functions.
Yeah, go ahead. Hi, everyone. So thank you for sharing very vital information. I am from Arigen Life Sciences, Hyderabad, and we are building our own AI product. That starts from retrosynthesis, nuclear magnetic resonance, novel hit generation, ADMET, and all that. And you rightly pointed that there is a good amount of data in the market, PubChem, USPTO, NMR shift, and all that. And they take you up to a good stage about your model benchmarking. But if you want to go to the production, that's not good enough. So my question and suggestion is, as a community, are we doing something on the concept of federated machine learning, wherein we say, okay, companies don't want to share the data, but they get the problem statement, they train the models locally and transfer only the weights, not the data. So are we doing something on those concepts for a better data in the market?
You want to talk about maybe federated learning and all that? Sharing models?
Yeah, this is interesting. There was a few years ago, seven pharmas, including I think GSK and a number of other ones, tested the hypothesis by carrying out federated studies where each of them had different aspects. Every drug company has a chemical library which they jealously guard. Not only is it the molecules, but also understanding of the biology of how those molecules act. Now, in an ideal world, this data would be available to everybody, but of course it's proprietary and it's helping the company to move forward. But there's different aspects of the knowledge, and so these companies carried out a federated study where they looked at aspects of the data that they had, and they shared, again, the meta-analysis that was openly available to all of them. They were then able to take it back and, as a result, improve the utility of the knowledge for translation into potential targets. This benefited everybody. Nobody was hurt, but it very much, like I talked about protecting the rights of the individuals who participate in studies, it protected their rights. So I think the model's been tested and found, at least in the initial period, to be viable. We need to see if it can continue and how regulations hopefully will promote this rather than hinder.
Was there one here?
Yeah, just one question.
Do you mind if I
Hello?
just make a very quick comment? So your question was, is something being done about federated machine learning? There is the National Health, the AI Strategy for Health, the National AI Strategy for Health document that's going to be released at 4 p.m. today. I strongly encourage you to go and be part of that session. Get a copy of that document. If you were to build a word cloud based on the text in there, the word federated would show up at least as big as this. So something is being done. Is it adequate? Well, I don't think so, because it is one thing to have the machinery to do federated learning. The problem is really that we don't have the incentives to do federated learning. Let us say I am an owner of data. Let's say I'm a Medanta or a Fortis or one of the 100 government medical colleges in any big state like UP where I come from. Why would I share the data? What is in it for me? In fact, there are at least 100 things that could go wrong and I could lose my job tomorrow. So I could be sued for malpractice. I could take that data. Some prankster could take that data and line it up against some care gap analysis standards, and I could get me into a lot of trouble. The reason why this apparently has worked in the US, and Parag could correct me, is because there is, I'm sorry for sounding cliched, but there is an ecosystem of data sharing. There are generators of data. There's regulation in place on how that data should be processed and how, in a safe bioethical manner, it can be shared with people who want to do something meaningful with it. I think that is missing along with incentives. And Parag, if you could put on your venture capitalist background and say something about what it would take to incentive align, because I think it's a really important question, and without data we're not going anywhere. So your thoughts?
Just to finish that so that we can have more questions. There are a number of projects that started off as data sharing. I'm sure you know about NASH, which Vanderbilt did with a handful of companies, Amgen, Regeneron, etc. Right? So data sharing from the beginning. There are other people that have developed other models. A good company to look at, just to read what they do, is Tempus AI, which again, gave something to each partner, but then said, part of what's going to happen is we're going to share it with everybody, right? And so they collect data, but they also make that widely available. So there's a reason for you. You have your data on 100,000 patients, but you'll have access to 1 million perhaps, right? So those are different formats that people have used. The same kind of thing obviously can happen in India, where the hospital chains, for example, could get together and say, let's have a sharing and make it possible. And that's a step in the whole chain, right? Were you trying to ask a question? Yeah. Go. Where's the mic?
Hello, sir. My name is Rachit Segal. I wanted to ask, in recent studies, AI is performing more better and accurately on synthetic data training. So is it right to use, or is it should we be using synthetic data in the case of medical?
Let me start, and if you want to add to that. So there is use, and AlphaFold is probably the most well-known example of that, right? But they've got to start somewhere. If you look at the major startups doing this, there's another famous one called Zaira, which is David Baker's lab, who also won the Nobel Prize. In an unusual startup that was backed by $1 billion, in the first round. But part of the issue they have is, where do they start from, right? So it's one thing to figure out the geometry, the folding of the protein, but you have to begin from somewhere else. That's the human data part, right? You still need to do that. Now maybe we'll figure out a way to get around that. But I don't see that in the near term. That's, you know, something that's so raw that I don't see it. But maybe it'll happen. Go ahead.
Yeah, and just to add to that, what I would say is absolutely concerns about synthetic data, but again, we don't have enough data at the moment. What I will say is that it appears to have value sufficient that both the FDA and the EMA, in culturally very different analytics, have both moved to regulate the use of synthetic data and its application. And I think it's interesting because you see the cultural differences between Americans and Europeans in this. The Americans want determination that the tools being used are robust and reliable. They can then be applied and the data can be considered in when you're looking at does this potential drug or does this variant that's been found have value. The Europeans, on the other hand, are saying that the tools used for the synthetic data must be trained on diverse populations so they're represented. So they're taking a human-first approach. The Americans are taking a technology-first approach. Both believe that it's necessary in order to help move the medical research and drug development forward.
Yeah, go ahead in the back there. Oh, can you give him the mic? The gentleman behind you. No.
I'm really compelled to just maybe 30 seconds. I want to make sure that my angst against synthetic data comes across very clearly. I think synthetic data is one of the most poorly understood notions to have arrived on the scene in the last couple of years. And until you think about how synthetic data is actually generated, you don't really appreciate it. Right. Till you believe that it's something that will just drop onto your plate from the sky. How do you generate a synthetic patient record, for example? So from the existing data? Yeah, but how? Like how?
Like of course. Combining the randomness of the data, like combining the multiple data into randomness to create new data.
Yeah, but like you drill a little bit further into that, and you'll realize that what you're actually doing is sampling from a ginormous multivariate distribution. You've got something like 20, 30,000 parameters. Each one could, some of them are categorical, some of them are quantitative. And now you have to sample in such a manner so that you're still within the same distribution. It is non-trivial, which is why a synthetic data set which mirrors a patient and lets you do any kind of investigation that you do on a real patient, in my opinion, doesn't exist. Synthetic data sets are purpose-built, and that's a data science way of saying that is that you constrain the problem. So you're trying to create a synthetic data set for predicting myocardial infarction, for predicting mortality, for predicting start of palliative care. Those kind of data sets are good, and if you formulated the problem clearly, yeah, I think it's a good thing to do.
Based on purpose.
On a per population, per problem basis.
I want to extend the question, and just one thing. I want you to please clear out or give, shed the light on the problem of optimization that you were mentioning in the starting. So we could understand it better, and like to look for solutions, it's important to understand the problem at the basic level. Can you please shed a little light on it?
I might ask you to spell out the question a little. To a multivariate approach, could be taken to a multivariate approach. The more variables that you have, and the more your function, the less your function looks like a parabola, the more tricky it becomes. So I was trying to, when I believe you're referring to some of my comments on search as optimization, that was a little bit hand-wavish, but essentially the concept I was trying to communicate is the same. You're trying to find something which is best, right? Now, defining the objective function means specifying best in terms of either a lowest value or a highest value or a range of values. If you can do that, you can turn your search into optimization.
Thank
you. Namaste and good afternoon to respected sirs and madams and respected doctors, professors from India and foreign countries. My question is, what is the need, role, and status of a regulatory mechanism, particularly in drug discovery using artificial intelligence or data science or integrative technologies and tools relating to a chronic diseases like thalassemia, Parkinson's, etc. Like integrating holistic traditional medicine and modern medicine towards a precision medicine related drug discovery, like Sanjeevani or Amrutam medicines, which we are having historical perspective to cure these chronic diseases. What is the need, role, and status of a common regulatory authority locally and globally perspective towards ethical, moral, clinical, medicinal, and legal technological perspective?
I was hoping you would make me answer that because it is incredibly high dimensional. So you're talking about a regulatory perspective, the need, the status, and the status of a regulatory framework.
Yes, sir.
For drug discovery, which
in local and global perspective, like US FDA.
Well, so
relating to clinical trials.
I think the role of a regulator, you can approach it from a legal standpoint, and then you can also approach it from an ethical standpoint. So drug discovery, if you step back and think about it, it's a giant science experiment. Okay? And it's an experiment that at some stage, the later stages in particular, involves humans. So it is, unless you want to repeat what happened during the time of the Nazis and the Tuskegee days, and all the bad things that can possibly go wrong when you do science experiments on human beings, you want to have a very strong, stable ethical framework. So I think the ethical underpinnings and the ethical need for a regulatory framework are more than obvious. Now, the legal aspect, I think, is a little bit more complicated. We are fortunate that now we have in India the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, which is the first step, which really brings into spotlight the notion of consent. I think of like a lot more needs to be done before you have some of these regulations actually become part of the SOPs which ethics committees and regulators which will look at this data and then give a go, no go on it. Transpires. I don't have anything concrete, like maybe you could break your question down into smaller buckets that I can parse a little more easily and then try to respond.
Relating to DPDP Act 2023, relating to data privacy and data security, particularly in clinical trials, to make a eco-friendly, healthy, safety and secured system.
Usko simple karo na, or complicated.
Yes, sir. Medical field itself is a very sensitive field, to be frank and honest.
Yes.
Very valuable field.
Yes, I think
we call
touched on
it.
a very important point.
Yes, sir. In this aspect, local, global, integrate is mandatory, particularly clinical trials.
2023 today is really, and if I'm allowed to be a little bit critical, it's a statement of good intent. It doesn't have teeth. For example, it says you should anonymize data. It applies to personal data. And a lot of people are taking the view that if you do not want to explicitly go and seek a patient's consent, one way to do that and actually escape the DPDP is by anonymizing the data. So then it doesn't remain personal data anymore. How do you actually do that is it's a gray area. And again, my team has done something in that space. You're very welcome to go and talk to Shubhadeep, who's sitting here, or go and visit the booth. So again, goes back to the problem of how data exists. It's unstructured. There is PHI lurking in the data. How do you deal with it so that you're not on questionable ethical or legal footing when you want to repurpose that for research? I think all that still needs to be done.
Thank you, sir.
Do you want to answer?
I'll just very quickly add, I absolutely agree with everything here. One thing I would add is when we talk about things like consent, there's a world of difference between consent and informed consent. So the regulations are there, but we also need to think about it right back at the medical school and other areas to make sure the people who are carrying them out are doing it with the way they were intended. It can often be very divergent.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, respected sirs and madams.
Do you have that mic back?
Okay, so I'm Farheen, I'm from Cognizant, and I'm a data scientist. And I.
So let us go ahead.
I'm audible, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So my question was like primarily for Parag and then in extension to everyone else. You said that everyone, all of us, the corporate people, should ditch everything else that we're working on and run towards this because we are based in India and it's like we're sitting on a gold mine. But as the talk progressed, we saw that there are a lot of, we are not yet there from the data perspective. So first question is like, apart from regulatory and everything, keeping everything aside, how can we right now, today, start anything from, in drug discovery phase, how can we contribute? Because like the data with the PI and everything, synthetic data is always there. But apart from that, how else we can start
Yeah,
today?
so I think there are a variety of steps, and it's a question of what you get excited by doing, right? In anything that you do, right? But the problem has many different parts that need to be solved. You heard Jonathan say that optimally, if you had data on 100 million people, you'd be able to do something meaningful with it, right? There he's thinking about all diseases, right? Maybe not all, but hell of a lot, a very large percentage. You'll still have some very rare. So one thing we need is just data itself. The data, as we've just spent 2 minutes talking about how that data needs to be properly collected and the issues around it, right? There's the ethical part, the informed consent, right? And we have a company that does that, and informed consent can be just like the Apple or Samsung things that you sign. You can't use the damn thing till you tick on I agree, right? If anyone here reads it, I want to meet you, right? Or the stuff you do when on something much more serious than using a phone, you sign up for a mutual fund. Do you actually read all that stuff before you do it? So informed consent, I think, should actually be as simple as possible. I think it should be less than 1 page, and I think it should only be explained by a medical person, right? It should really be simple. And then after that, if you anonymize the data, you can deal with that. But as a problem, that is a problem. Collecting data, purpose collected, as opposed to going to 5 hospital chains and saying, give me your data, and then finding out that, oh, I wish I knew what cholesterol was. I make that up. But when you purpose collect it, then you have solved all the possibilities, which might mean 100+ variables. So it's an expensive proposition doing it up front, right? When you're doing that. So that's an example of something you could do. But if you're inclined towards organizing data or looking at it and reviewing it, then bioinformatics might be the way that you say, okay, I'm going to solve this part of the problem, right? And if you're essentially just a computer scientist, by the way, we have to go in like 2 minutes. Then there's the whole business of the modeling itself, right? Which is an exciting thing, for some people. So I think it depends upon what you're doing. So if you do it today, any of these, it's a function of what excites you.
But the data is not available with us.
You have to collect the data.
So the first thing is solving the data problem, which AI can also help with, because we are in that
AI
phase.
will sort through that data when you have it. AI will take that data and say, here are my conclusions. I look at the data and I see this pattern. I'm simplifying it, right?
Your question was, what can I do now? Your question was, what can I do now?
Yeah.
Come and work at me, Mansa.
Yeah, are we done, sir? Can I ask just one quick question?
Okay, one last question.
One last question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, all the distinguished speakers. Very interesting and pertinent points. I'll just quickly ask to Dr. Vibhu, the point you mentioned about EHR challenges, the unstructured data. Quickly, although Government of India already launched way back National Health Digital Mission for the metadata standards across all hospitals, what is your feedback in terms of the hospitals you have worked so far in India in terms of compliance to that metadata? Because if we know that, I think that will solve majority of the problem related to the data structure.
So you're referring to ABDM, which I think is a very well thought out and very well laid out scheme. As of now, it's a statement of good intent. If you look at the number of hospitals that are actually contributing data to ABDM, are becoming ABDM compliant, that number is minuscule. and there are lots of operational challenges why hospitals are not able to do that. We can meet offline and discuss
Sure.
that.
Thank you.
We got to stop here. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Vibhu and Jonathan for having come down to present here. And once more, let me just repeat my exhortation. Go out and push this. I want all of you guys to be messengers and convey the message that we've transported to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have printed out the photos for you. If you want, I can give